How's it going today, guys? So today we're going to be talking about what you should do if you are upside down on your car loan or you're in a situation where you owe more on your car than your car is even worth. Unfortunately, I'm going to be sharing some personal experience with this because this is a mistake I made myself, and I'm going to give you guys an idea of what your options are as far as what you should do if you're upside down on your car loan. What options do you even have? So if you're in this situation, you have what is called negative equity in that vehicle. And maybe it's not a vehicle, maybe it's a camper, maybe it's a motorcycle, who knows, whatever it is. Usually things, recreational vehicles or anything with an engine, it's going to depreciate in value with time. It's not like a house that you buy where hopefully it's going to appreciate or at least hold its value. The second you drive a car off the lot or a motorcycle or an RV off the lot, it's going to start depreciating in value. So when you're in this situation, you have negative equity. That's when you owe more than the asset is worth. And this most commonly happens with cars or maybe things like boats or other, recreational vehicles and things like that that people buy. So how does this happen in the first place? Let's go ahead and focus on cars. There's a number of reasons why this happens, and it's important to understand why that is because the number one thing you can do in this situation is make sure it doesn't happen again, because the options as far as getting out of this are really not that great. But the number one thing you can do is figure out how to avoid getting in this situation again in the first place. Number one, the main thing that causes this is people who buy a vehicle and they put $0 down, and then you add that off the lot depreciation. So on average, when you drive a vehicle off the lot, it automatically loses 10% of its value. So let's say you paid $20,000 for a car. The minute you drive it off that lot, it's now worth $18,000. So $2,000 of value has just vanished at that point. Meanwhile, you put $0 down on that vehicle. You have no equity in that vehicle. You owe the full value of it, and it's already worth $2,000 less than you paid for it. So I know a lot of people get involved in those gimmicks where they say, oh, $0 down or no payments for the first 3 months, but all that's going to do is put you behind as far as the payments and paying that down and trying to maintain the value of that vehicle as far as what you have paid down on it. Otherwise, you get in a situation where you, in fact, owe more than that car is worth. That's just going to make that situation worse. Number two is paying too much for a vehicle. That's something that I did myself. I bought a car that was a very flashy car. I talked about this in some of my other videos. I bought a Subaru WRX, a used one from a dealer, and I never even went online and looked at the value of that car. So I just, went out there, got a loan, and I was able to get a loan for this car. And then after I bought the car, I did my research and I realized that I had been raked over the coals and I paid way too much for that car. So this is a mistake I've made myself. So if you pay too much for the car in the first place, or you have too many options, whether it be, leather seats or the sunroof or navigation, adding things like that are just going to increase that rate of depreciation for that vehicle and make it so you're going to owe a lot more money than you would have if you didn't have all those other bells and whistles. Another thing is short-term vehicle ownership. So this is people who buy a car and then they say, you know what, I want to sell this car in a year or something like that. You want to make sure you're holding a vehicle for a long time because the majority of that depreciation takes place in the first 3 years. So if you want to get to a point where you at least can break even on that vehicle, it's probably going to take 4 or 5 years if you have like a 5 or 6 year term loan. Now, I have talked about in the past, I'll link up this video at the end, it's a general rule of thumb for buying a car, and it's definitely not a 6-year term loan. It's actually a 4-year term loan maximum. So I'm going to link that up at the end if you guys want to check that video out as far as what you should do when you're buying a car. But when you have a very long-term loan and then you have short-term vehicle ownership where you only have that car for a year or two, you basically are taking that majority of the depreciation at once. You're taking the biggest hit on that vehicle than anyone else will that actually goes ahead and buys that vehicle. So for example, the car that I drive now, the list price for this car was $26,000 and I bought it 1 year later with 6,000 miles on it for $18,000. So that's a difference of $8,000 right there just by buying a 1-year-old car because the majority of that depreciation takes place in that first year. So that's one thing you can do as well is not buy a brand new car. And then another thing that happens as well is people may fall into that gimmick of skipping payments. I know a lot of companies will say, oh, it's Christmas, go ahead and skip your payment for this month. And all that's going to do is make it so that way that vehicle's depreciating and you're not paying it down in the meantime. That's another way people end up getting in trouble is by skipping payments and not paying down that loan at all, not paying down that principal. So what do you do when you're in this situation? What do you do when you can't afford to sell your car? Let's say you're driving a car that you can't afford, but you can't afford to sell it because you owe more than it's even worth. Let's say you owe $25,000 and the car is only worth $20,000. What are you supposed to do there? So number one of the things you could do is just refinance at a lower rate. If you're a young person and maybe you bought a flashy car, one of the easiest things you can do is try to refinance, go shopping for a better car loan. And usually if you've been making your payments on time for the last year or a couple of years and you have good credit, you should be able to find a better interest rate somewhere else, especially being a young person. Number two would be to sell something else that you don't need in order to try to pay down that car and just get out from under it. So I don't know if you have other toys laying around, a motorcycle or a boat or something you don't need. Another option you have is to just sell something else that you don't need and try to get that vehicle paid down. Either try to pay it off, that way you're not, behind on it, or just try to get out from under it and buy something that is more conservative that's not going to depreciate as fast. Number three, if you have the means to do it, you might as well just recognize the loss now. If you can't afford your payments, then just sell the car, ideally to a private party. Don't trade it back into the same dealer, but ideally sell the car private party. That is going to be difficult because you're going to have to try to get a clean title, and that's also kind of a mess because it's very difficult to sell a car when you have a lien on the title. So if you have the means to pay off the car yourself, get a clean title, and then sell it private sale, that is probably your best option just to get out from under it. Number four would be to trade it in for an older or a simpler car, maybe with less bells and whistles or those added options. But again, I would not go back to the same dealer because it's going to be kind of like taking a trip to one of those video game stores where you buy a video game for $60 and a week later you go to trade it in and they say, okay, we'll give you $7 for it. And you're like, what sense does that make? I just paid $60 for it. You're going to have that same experience with that car dealer. So I would at least go to a different dealer. And then number five, guys, the final thing you can do here is just make better decisions going forward. Unfortunately, this is a mistake that a lot of people make. I made this mistake myself. I lost $10,000 in the course of 1 year by buying an expensive car and owning it in the short term. So I lost $10,000 in 1 year. That's an insane amount of money to lose. But so many people, especially young people, go through this, and I wouldn't beat yourself up over it. Just use it as a learning experience. And if you guys want to learn more about how to actually responsibly buy a car, I'm going to link up that video at the end. But guys, that is all I got for this video. If you enjoyed it, please drop a like. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing to be notified of any future uploads. And as always, I thank you for taking the time to watch this video.